Got it.
This meeting is being recorded.
You just hit that.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, you can't see the picture very good, but this book is called Formation for Transformation, an approach to renewing the teaching ministry within the church. And it's written by Edith Villamaro Sanchez. All right. And this book, the purpose of this book is to present various important pedagogical approaches that the church usually does not take into account, and that will help collaborate with the Holy Spirit in the believer's process of transformation. And with that, I will stop there. It is recommended by Samuel Escobar, by Ruth Padilla de Borst, and by Andres Reed. So a good book to consider. Our lecturer today is Marina Behera, who doesn't need a long introduction, but is one of our esteemed lecturers here at OCMS. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Marina, and please begin with your lecture.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I will share my screen. Yeah, this is the one. Share. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you fine. You
Yeah,
want to put it on present view, or do you just want it on slide view?
I want it on slide view because I don't want to lose it. I want to see the numbers there in the corner. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. All right. So good afternoon. In my lecture this afternoon, I will be looking at the challenges for theological education and missional formation in different contexts. In addressing the gap between theological education in relation to the Catholicity of the Church and to theological curricula, which are rooted in specific traditions, I will explore the metaphor of hospitality as an approach that could help to bridge this gap. I'm inviting you to think along with me on a few ideas I'm developing. You may recognize some of the reflections from my earlier presentations or writings in my presentation today. Please bear with me as I lead you through a discussion of these points, some of these points, as at the moment, these are still works in progress since I am yet to arrive at a full-fledged concept. I will start with a reflection on online education as a context for theology, then address the issue of various contexts and introduce the metaphor of hospitality before I offer some ideas how this metaphor can be fleshed out for theological education. The new context in front of the computer screen. One of the important factors bridging the diverse regional and theological contexts over the last 2 years is the massive move to online meetings and teaching. There is a long tradition of various models of online teaching, but COVID-19 forced us to move into a space which many of us were not so familiar with. Before the pandemic, online education was one medium of providing theological education. But the pandemic cut off any alternative to it, especially teaching in person in a local physical space. Those who could not move into that space were pushed aside and their education was put on a hold. That's time spent in front of the screen by working remotely and teaching online during these months made me aware of opportunities teaching online offers, as well as what is missing. It helped in a way to recognize distinct features of teaching and lecturing in person, and also ways by which the contextuality of teaching and learning theology become possible by being more connected across contexts. For the sake of my argument, I would like to highlight two aspects of online teachings and meetings which tell us something about classroom teaching. In one of my online meetings early in the pandemic, I said to someone that it would be nice to eventually see each other in real life. The person asked in return if what we were doing was not real. Evidently, to that person, our virtual class transcended the limitations of not meeting face-to-face, though I think it was equally evident what I wished to express. In order to characterize the meetings off screen, some of us have come to use the expression physical presence. Even that is misleading because we are still connected physically when we meet on screen. What do then many of us miss? Maybe it can best be expressed by saying that an online class is not a fully embodied presence. It is more like a live picture. We miss the awareness or sense of the physical presence of others. The look around, to look around, the atmosphere in the room we share, etc. One dimension we have gained through the transmitted live picture is to get to know the study place or spaces of others better without visiting them. So we comment on the background, the books on the shelf they have, or the cats or dogs seeking attention, etc. Interference of the system. My second point is that even after all the practice and learning of the how-to, the system interferes heavily. I do not speak of all the troubles of weak connections, the audio missing, or people not switching off their microphones, presentations not being screened, etc. Some glitches can also happen in an offline class. One very distracting thing for me has been to see myself on the screen all the time and to have no idea what the others see on their screens. I learned about the different settings one can choose. The most distracting setting I know is to speak to a screen on which I see no one except myself and my presentation or a selection of pictures or slides, not knowing whether people are present, whether they have a weak connection, or are just pretending to be there and to be listening. I appreciate that remote and online working has enabled us to continue to work and in some respect has made our working together even more intensive. Most of us, I assume, began to feel the impact of being secluded and started to crave for community. Still, I'm not a fan of online, which may affect the assessment I make of online teaching. Nevertheless, I began to reflect on whether the dimensions we miss in online work or teaching can teach us something about the way we teach in the classroom. Being online, I should speak here more precisely about online lecturing because online teaching is much more than a transmitted lecture. Being online seems to reduce the forms of our being present and cuts off the familiar forms of co-presence and interaction. In a classroom, there is a shared environment and there are more channels of communication than on a screen. It is not that we cannot have fellowship via the screen, but it is reduced to a flat form. By this, I mean so much has to be explicitly spoken and talked about. One could almost say, unless we express it via an emoji or talk about it, the sense of communicating effectively is not present. The meeting space also is reduced from a three-dimensional one to a flat world. Even though the shared space is enlarged and we can connect our study rooms or places around the globe, being present on the same screen does not connect the many and diverse spaces we speak from. They seem to be blurred out. I find it telling that one of the most used tools of Zoom is the blurring of the background. Often, this has an estranging effect because it distorts one's own representation. All of a sudden, in your picture, and a ear may disappear, or your head has a different shape because in the picture, it is merging with the background. For me, this detail is a constant reminder that being online is not only a different medium, but that the medium comes with underlying rules that steer and limit our forms of being present. Teaching in context. In the Zoom sessions, there is the function of the host and co-host. It signifies the power to steer the meeting, to admit people, to mute them, to allow them to share the screen. This triggered in me the thought that in Zoom meetings, others are not called guests. My assumption is that the host is a function which could better be compared to a master of ceremonies than to being hospitable. Reflecting on the dimensions which other forms of theological education offer, the classroom, presence, embodied meetings, interaction, which include the other dimensions of being in contact at one moment, led me to reflect on the metaphor of hospitality. The use of the metaphor has also to do with the fact that I do not want to romanticize the classroom teaching. It has its own challenges, among which I wish to mention only two. It can be highly unhospitable by being exclusive on the basis of the regulations of who is allowed to be present or can afford to attend education on a campus and in a classroom. OCMS is one place where we attempt to mitigate this by enabling people from the majority world access to a highly academic world in which we sometimes look like strangers. Secondly, the blackboard in the classroom can be the symbol of the fact that teaching in a classroom can be very much centered on the teacher. This model reduces opportunities of co-presence to listening and answering the questions of the teaching person and could be compared to the host function in a Zoom meeting. In my course on contextual theology in our OCMS Opry delivered online so far, I start with the observation that as theologians, we wish to develop a theology which speaks to specific people in specific place and time. If we wish for the gospel to become meaningful to people, we need to take account of the context they're living in and of our own context. I state that this is not simply a methodological issue. It is at the core of the gospel. We believe that God incarnated in one person, born in a specific region and time, which is no longer our context. We believe and proclaim that this incarnation at that time has a universal dimension, which is valid for all humans at all times, even those to come. This is the gap I was speaking about in the opening paragraph. Let me continue with some passages on theological education, which could serve such a contextual approach. There are various definitions and attempts to characterize theological education, and this series of MPhil lecture explores some of them. The speakers will provide a series of case studies against the background of an existing global panorama, which the voluminous Handbook on Theological Education in a global or regional perspective offer. This have been published as part of the Rackham Studies in Global Christianity. The Handbook of Theological Education in World Christianity starts with a broad array of issues such as mission, gender, race, disability, and others in theological education. If one browses through the articles, there appears to be a strong insistence that students and leaders have to be knowledgeable in these issues in order to be considered theologically educated. On closer look, especially into the regional overview, theological education is also about being rooted in the various traditions of the churches. It is evident that to be an educated theologian implies the ability to identify ongoing ecclesial and dogmatic differences in order to transcend them. It seems more and more to me that the traditional theological curricula do not put much emphasis on missional formation, which could be considered to be the performative dimension of theological education. Missional formation includes reflection on communicating the gospel to non-believers and to be educated or trained for interfaith dialogue. Mission theology admonishes us that even though mission, and evangelism comprise of the invitation to join a specific church, it should not be detrimental to a common witness to the body of Christ. The common witness should be in the spirit of the catholicity of the church in the original sense. Otherwise, the body of Christ, by being dismembered, will be unrecognizable. The International Missionary Council study process, OCMS, is being involved in, which is the celebration of the founding of the International Missionary Council in 1921, reminded me again that Edinburgh 1910 had been based on the model that mission is sending people abroad. This can be seen in the title of the first commission report, within quote, carrying the gospel to the non-Christian world, close quote. It implies a logic where those who dwell in certain places, example in the global north, own an object called the gospel, which they need to carry to another place and hand over to others. This model of mission has not been challenged until much later. Interestingly, already in 1910, this had been identified in the commission report on the formation of missionaries as a danger to introduce from without, in an external and mechanical way, systems of truth, knowledge, and practice, which are the result of Western experience. In India, this issue of contextuality has been discussed from the beginning of the modern mission movement. The United Theological College in Bangalore, where I had taught for 7 years, was founded on 8 July 1910, 1 month after the World Missionary Conference had convened in Edinburgh. The UTC was the outcome of ongoing discussions on the formation and education of missionaries and pastors for the service in the mission fields, and it was termed at that time, While the participants of the Edinburgh Conference laid emphasis on training missionaries to be sent to the mission fields, the participants of the 4th Decennial Mission Conference, which convened in 1902 in Madras, now known as Chennai, discussed the need of theological education for indigenous pastors, which would cater to the incumbent needs of the Indian church. They resolved that a theological institute for higher degrees was needed for India, and that it should be a common enterprise of the various mission societies for the promotion of union in the Indian and Ceylon churches. It will not be too far-fetched to say that the theological institution, its campus, and its curriculum, as was envisioned in the proceedings of the conference, could be considered as the blueprint for the United Theological College, especially with the emphasis on a united and advanced theological college education. The curriculum for the training of future indigenous church leaders was informed by the Western theological system of the late 19th century. The conference of 92 stated succinctly that in the envisioned college, within quote, for the present, the dependence, that is in theology and in teachers, must be largely on Europeans who were still coming with their different denominational backgrounds and particularities. This setting created a tension between the objective of theological education as a means of fostering unity among churches in India and a curriculum formed on the basis of theologies that had been developed in the context of controversies and debate among Western churches and a continuing denominationalism of mission bodies promoting unity. Much has changed since the days of Edinburgh 1910. The curriculum developed by the Senate of Serampore College, to which UTC Bangalore is affiliated, can be considered to be ecumenical, both in the sense of integrating various church traditions and it addressing issues of the ecumenical movement like the ones I have listed in the opening paragraph. The curriculum includes some learning about mission, but it is debatable how far it is missional formation. Theologians should be knowledgeable about the tradition they come from. Hailing from the Reformed tradition, I am convinced that Dogmatic differences are to be taken seriously and cannot easily be discarded. However, there seems to be a gap between the guiding metaphors in mission theology, Missio Dei, common witness, and the search for unity, and a theological education which focuses on one's own tradition and relating to others by highlighting the differences in theology and ecclesiology. One aspect of a quality curriculum is certainly to acquire knowledge about this dimension, and teaching ecumenism has to address the differences. It demonstrates, however, that it is a different matter when it comes to learning what to do to overcome these differences, or at least to live with them as long as they are not solved. In a chapter which I wrote on the Commission for World Mission and Evangelism of the WCC after the integration of the International Missionary Council into the WCC, that is the World Council of Churches, it became clear to me that in their documents, there is a strong tendency to conceptualize mission as the expression of local churches in their context. Such a church-focused understanding of mission is especially vulnerable to be affected by the differences in ecclesiology and dogmatic of churches doing mission in the same context. This was another vantage point from which to reflect on the metaphor of hospitality as a basis for a conceptual approach to theological education, which may be able to integrate the two aspects leading to the identified gap. In my research, I came across a thesis, Hospitality in Higher Education, published in 2016 by So Hui Leng Davina, a female Asian theologian. She discusses the use of the concept of hospitality in discussions on higher Christian education. For her, hospitality is constituted by practicing inclusion, presence, care, and reciprocity. Her main concern is about how teachers can create a conducive learning experience, atmosphere for a holistic education in the classrooms of their institution. I understand her focus also as a reaction to the fact that hospitality had been explored earlier in the context of interfaith and plurality in a project by the Association of Theological Schools in North America. For my approach, I go back to a more fundamental concept of hospitality than source. The World Missionary Conference in Athens, 2005, promoted the image of a congregation or church as a hospitable and reconciling community. The paper on religious plurality and Christian self-understanding of this conference used hospitality as a hermeneutical key. The hallmark of hospitality as a hermeneutical key is the openness to accept others in their otherness. This claim can be applied as well in the plurality of theological differences within the Christian fold. I wish to highlight that such an approach does not limit hospitality to its performance among people in the same space, but it defines an attitude which includes an openness for people one has not met yet. The participants of the conference developed the metaphor of hospitality into a concept by highlighting the following characteristic. They reflected on encounters in a plural world where we become strangers to each other in culture, religion, ethnic identities, etc., even while sharing the same cultural or regional context. It is through our openness to the other that we may encounter God in new ways. This is also a critique of an understanding of a context being culturally or religiously homogeneous. Number two, in the changing world, contexts and movements of people, who is the stranger in the midst of others, and hence who is guest or host, changes constantly. This challenges us to understand hospitality as mutual openness. In this light, mission is not the intended transformation of the other, but a mutual transformation. Mission, when understood in this line, has no room for triumphalism. It contributes to removing the causes for religious animosity and the violence that often goes with it. Hospitality requires Christians to accept others as created in the image of God, knowing that God may talk to us through others to teach and transform us, even as God may use us to transform others. God's hospitality. The most radical expression of mission as hospitality is to acknowledge that human limitations and limitations of language make it impossible for any community to have exhausted the mystery of the salvation God offers to humankind. Therefore, it is this humility that enables us to say that salvation belongs to God, God only. We do not possess salvation, we participate in it. We do not offer salvation, we witness to it. We do not decide who would be saved, we leave it to the providence of God. As Christians, we are rooted in the everlasting hospitality of God. He is the host of salvation. The paper highlights, or rather my presentation highlights, that in the eschatological vision, we have the powerful symbol of God becoming both a host and a guest among us. Learning to be guests. At the World Missionary Conference in Athens, hospitality was developed as a hermeneutical key for understanding mission in an interfaith perspective. Monsieur Day is not the only concept which proposes that mission is the basis for all theology. In the hermeneutical perspective of hospitality, this theology declares the church to be a kind of a guest of God. The hermeneutical key can also be used for unlocking missional formation and theological education in general. I would like to use the radical concept of hospitality and to translate it for education. This could run like this. It is the humility rooted in the symbols of God, being a guest among us and a host for us, which enables us to say that we do not own education. We are participants in a learning and journeying community. We witness to knowledge and wisdom, knowing that we do not own it. In order to be authentic theological educators, we need to be able to be hosts as well as guests in life practice and in the practice of reflecting on it. Being a guest, Amos Young made a valid point when he asked in the context of ATS project on hospitality, what it means to shift the emphasis from being the host to being the guest. His article argues in a similar way like the Athens papers that God is not only the host, but a guest among us. Young argues similarly, God has become truly human among us and continues to be present in the spirit in his created world. As already mentioned, Young reflects on interfaith relationships, but it seemed to me meaningful to apply his thought in a setting in which theological differences separate us. One of the important aspects is that theology on this basis means to share the way of life of the others, to be guests among them. I propose that shifting the perspective from being educated as a future host for the gospel to developing the attitude of being a guest in the life of people could bring a change in the perspective of theological education. The main thrust of this argument is then to start with the plurality of contexts, church traditions, and even of religions, which in many scenarios and contexts people are aware of. In our doing theology, we need to accept that we are all rooted in a church tradition, but that none of them is exhausting the mystery of God, even if we work on the basis that the one we are rooted in is the best approximation we know. If this is taken as the basis for theological education as missional formation, the methodology and ways of teaching and learning must correspond to this approach. The focus needs to be put on theologizing, not on learning theology, as the Roman Catholic theologian Steve Bevans pointed out. For the curriculum, this means that theologians, pastors, or lay people need to first of all learn methodologies on how they can understand their context and the life of the people around them. This includes to study the Bible as a testimony to how God's people have coped with the same problem. The second attitude they need to develop in a missional formation is how they can theologize with others and for others. How can they be host and practice hospitality? And how can they be open to become guests in the midst of strangers? I'm sure that this attitude can be developed and formed not only in a classroom session. Being repeatedly exposed to a shifting and changing situation, such as online sessions, can be conducive if we organize these meetings on the basis of the root metaphor of hospitality. This implies an awareness of the underlying regulations which structure learning and teaching. We also need to keep in mind that the digital world is the space for more and more communication. We do not only learn online for life in physically shared presence, but also for communicating the gospel and theology online. Guichen has written on that for one of the volumes that will be published in the IMC study process volume or series. I want to take into account as well that most of us are sure that we will not return to the classroom situation as we had done before COVID and leave the online space behind. We will need to develop methodologies which integrate learning and teaching in physical, online, and hybrid classes. So far, I have been talking about theological education, which follows a curriculum aiming at training theologians. OCMS is part of the movement for theological education by providing some with a degree which will legitimize them as teachers in theology, mission, and other related disciplines. Others contribute through research on important and edge-cutting issues and contribute to knowledge. In my OPRI course on contextual studies, I state that one of the many contexts in which we act as researchers and teachers is the context of academics. A question our candidates are asked is, what will be their contribution to knowledge? We may ground what we do in God's mission, but we need to translate our work into a context in which academics may not fully subscribe to our motivation and will evaluate our research according to standards that are related to their discipline. I think this liminal existence on the borderline of two contexts is captured well by the metaphor of hospitality as being able to be host and guest. We may look like tolerated guests in the secular academic world. We are as well host, offering to look at issues from the perspective of theologians and mission practitioners. Let me conclude with this remark. Hospitality as a theological root metaphor offers perspective which could help to bridge the gap between the catholicity of the church and theological curricula, which are rooted in specific traditions. It can be achieved by acquiring the capacity to be host of our contexts and traditions, as well as becoming guest in other contexts and tradition. If we live this attitude in the spirit that we do not own either salvation or that our theology exhausts the mystery of God, the mentioned gap will be transformed into a journey towards a common goal instead of dealing with the heavy burden of a past marked by splits. Where we head to is more important than where we come from. I hope to unlock this metaphor as a meaningful hermeneutical key for the agenda of theological education. I have tried to evaluate the setting of online teaching for missional formation to highlight some aspects of classroom teaching and to recognize some aspects of the contribution of the different learning and teaching settings. The points definitely needs further development, but as I had said in the beginning, I'm asking you to think along with me. For now, I can say that to learn the attitude of hospitality means more than learning how to be a host in a Zoom meeting. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Marina. And for those who want to respond or ask a question, down at the bottom bar is a button that says reactions, and you press that and it says raise hand. So if you want to do that, go ahead and raise a hand. Marina, I guess might as well start off. In terms of a curriculum, where would you see a section or a beginning or an introduction to hospitality within a theological curriculum, so this becomes part of the ground and formation of theological students internationally?
If you're talking about within a curriculum, I would say that it would not be specifically like any discipline or any of the department or subject should not be made responsibility for this, but it is a perspective that can be utilized or that can be used in all the department, in all the discipline, that what you know and what your traditions provide you and teach you is not exhausting the mystery of salvation or the mystery of God, but that there are other perspectives where you could become the guest, and those perspectives could together enrich the learning process and the journey together towards a common goal. So I would not say that it belongs to any discipline, but in all disciplines, and it's a perspective that should be followed or could be followed.
Okay, well, we will recognize Marjorie and then Damon.
Yeah, hi, Marina. Thank you so much for your paper. It's really sparked some thinking in my own mind, and I really appreciate the metaphor of hospitality. Just two comments. One, in the beginning, when you were talking about the Zoom environment and how some things were being blurred in the background and how that was unique to Zoom, I just wanted to make the point that I feel like that's something we do in person as well, in the sense that when I come to OCMS as a student, my background is blurred because people don't know me. And I am the one who chooses what to reveal about myself, even in in-person interaction. So that was just one thought I had about that point. And then the second thought was that you also mentioned something that I think was really very powerful, that you said that in the history of missions, it was this idea of carrying an object, which was the gospel, to a foreign land, a different place. And then you're using this metaphor of hospitality. And so basically, I think, in my own head, I'm thinking, well, we need to make sure that we change this concept of mission to being carrying a person of Jesus versus an object. So hospitality is a people concept, is a social concept, whereas we've unfortunately objectified the gospel, and that objectification has caused a lot of the divisions. But when you sit down and you talk to somebody person to person and connect with them as a person, then there's a different dynamic that's exposed. And so I've really appreciated just the way you phrased that, and the point that you brought out.
Thank you, Marjorie. I think you were spot on in talking about when you mentioned that you can blurt out your background even in an in-presence meeting. But then again, just a small point, when you are present in one space, there are also things that speak, It doesn't have to be the words that are spoken. It could be whether you look at ease or you look uneasy. So these are things that you cannot see online. So those are just the little things, apart from what you said. Thank you.
Amen.
It's interesting that you said about something's being lost via Zoom. So I was just wondering why you're delivering your lecture in your own little desk and not join the faculty members here face to face with us. So there could be some other reasons, but it's just kind of interesting observation. My real question is about hospitality and where it is being practiced. I know it's not only one course or one session, but it's a whole approach to theological education or formation. So it's a very good idea. I like it very much. Excellent. My question is, can you give us some example where this has been practiced in some way or form?
I mean, like thank you, Damon. I have experience only in the Indian context so much as to do when you talk about theological education in all its, what would you call, in all its stages with the bachelor's, the master's, and the doctoral program. So I would say in India, for example, you have colleges in Tamil Nadu, which is TTS, where they try to do theological education and theologize together in a way that is not foreign. So they would, even the setting of the institution is very indigenous. They have a classroom which are, under a thatch hut or something out in the open space. And when they look at theological themes, they try to find out, what does it mean for us? I mean, that's not only for TTS. TTS, I brought it up because in India, it's known as being very indigenous. But then we try to look at our curriculum in a way, always asking the question, what does it mean for us? Sometimes it's good, but sometimes it leads us also astray, because sometimes you can exaggerate and not stop, but try to give a different meaning rather than the original meaning which is found in the gospel. So I would not say that it's been successful anywhere, but it is a journey that everybody is attempting to. And I think it's an invitation, and I would not be speaking about it if it has been successful and that there's no longer for us to strive for.
Yeah, sorry, remind me again where this college is.
It's in Tamil Nadu in India. But then, of
What is
course,
it?
in Tamil Nadu in India, it's TTS, Tamil Nadu Theological College. I can also give another example. When I was working in the WCC at the Ecumenical Institute, there were attempts, by the people from the global north, the white man or woman, who would say, let's not talk about the ecumenical movement anymore. Let's not look at the history anymore, because this is a white man's assembly, white man's meeting, white man's agenda, and so on. Let's look at issues. But then I would argue and say, no, it's not a white man's story. It's not a Western church story. It is our story. The ecumenical movement and the meetings and the discussion that takes place is all because of the questions that are raised in the global south. The questions and the problems that are raised in the global south. Problems, challenges faced by the people in the mission field that leads to the discussion. Okay, the people who are discussing, maybe the white man and the white woman in the global north setting, but still the agenda is from the globe, is from the context, the global south. Therefore, the way we look at history and also how we try to theologize is trying to look at, where do we come from? What does it mean for us? And we do not like to use the word church history. I've never used the word church history, because church history for us would mean, looking at the denomination which come and started the church, but we would rather call it history of Christianity, because that would mean that it's a history that we all share together, irrespective of our different denomination and the denomination and background of the missionaries who brought the gospel to us. So we don't use those words. Just a few examples. Yeah. I don't know whether that satisfies you, Damon. Yeah, but
Go ahead, David. You're up next.
Yes, I'm sharing this huge space with Marina. I didn't want her to be alone and by herself in this room. I basically would like to affirm her rather passionate and reasoned appeal to bring hospitality to the very center of our discourse on theological education, and this is well done. She referred to Davina So's PhD thesis, and she'll be happy to know that this thesis has now been published by Langham. The title of the book is "The Motive of Hospitality in Theological Education," and it's very likely that she has some additional chapters in this book. What I really like to see going forward is to take this idea of a binary between host and guest further by actually exploring what this means to the guests, as it were, or to the students who are attending our classes. So you talked about four different facets that that Davina So has also talked about. So what does it mean? What does inclusion mean to the students who are attending our classes? What does acceptance mean to the students who are attending our classes? what about presence or contact? How do they see it? How do they perceive it? And likewise, care or pastoral care and reciprocity or exchange. Are you aware of any kind of primary level research, any qualitative research that actually explores these four ideas, or similar ideas that have been drawn from the wider world of dialogue and mission among people of other faiths, and applied to the context of theological education? How these ideas of inclusion, presence, care, reciprocity are being appreciated by those who are sitting on the other side. Do they also see it in the way that theological educators see it?
David, I mean, like, that was a full loaded question and comment. So maybe I will just answer with a very simple response by saying that I have said that we need to be able to be host and guest at the same time. That being a teacher or being a faculty, we are hosts and the students are our guests. No, that's exactly what I am saying. Is it shouldn't be. Because as a host, if we take on the role of the host, we offer to the students our perspective, what we have, our theology, which comes from our experience and our context and tradition. And at the same time, we're willing to be guests to the perspective and the contextual experience and the experiences that our students come and bring into it. So there is this space of reciprocity, acknowledging that what we have, either the students or the teachers have, does not exist, the mystery of God and his work. But at the same time, we're trying to find a way to grow together, to journey together, even though both of us, even though all the people who are present would think that what they stand for and what they believe in is the best for them. But that does not exclude the other is wrong. So therefore, we will be the host, offering what we have, what we learn, what we can bring to the table. But at the same time, we should also be the guests, to be able, to have the humility, the vulnerability, to be in a space where we need also to get and take something from the others. I don't know that.
Oh, no, this is excellent at the theoretical level. Yes. at which you're operating, and I would really like to affirm what you've just said. I'm just wondering about whether you're aware of any sort of qualitative research that explores this, in different theological colleges, or even the colleges that you mentioned from India.
Yes, I'm not aware of a research or something that has been done in depth on this topic, but then it's something that people often speak about and often offer, because the metaphor of hospitality is not new. It's always used, in a theological circle. Whenever you have a topic, you have that. But then I'm not aware of somebody using these metaphors and doing a research specifically on theological education.
Okay, Paul?
I think I was actually one of the examiners on Davina's thesis, so it's nice to hear about this. I was thinking different levels, master's and doctoral level, working with students, that although we might have a big picture of the educator, who is the more qualified, is the host, and the student is the guest, in many ways we can think about it almost like a kind of a Taoist symbol, where there's white inside the black and black inside the white. Because to me, just this morning, I was talking with Kanat about his work. So in a sense, Kanat, when I'm talking with him, he is showing me his work. Actually, he is the host.
Yes.
And in many senses, I'm the guest. I think part of being the host hospitality is to make yourself vulnerable. So whether you're the student who is listening to what the supervisor is saying or the other way around, doesn't matter. You have to be vulnerable, and you also have to give of your best. So if you're training that person, or that person is showing you their work, you hope that they have done their best, and you hope that you're prepared and give your best for them. So I think the two themes of being vulnerable and doing your best, at the same time within a dynamic of flipping backwards and forward between who gives and who receives, are a really good way to go forward, and it can be done very practically.
Thank you, Paul. I echo that. I learned a lot from the student that I work with.
Yeah, I would agree that, and also, the interdisciplinary aspect that we have in OCMS, which we are encouraging our students to have to be open to others' perspective and not just be located in one, in one discipline, but to be able to also draw from other discipline. And yeah, thank you, Paul, for bringing that up. Yeah.
Yeah, I would echo Paul's thought as well, in the sense the big difference I notice in terms of a lot of research that was done in Singapore as to here is it was expected in Singapore that the professor would lead and then the student would research there. What I've liked about here is the students are lead, but that's not easy. It's to get them to begin to say what's happening in their country, how they understand it in their context, why that's important. But that has produced some really incredible work here at this center that kind of goes off the beaten track, goes into areas where people haven't gone before. So
in some sense, OCMS has been very hospitable. Really, I mean, think about the whole range of PhD topics that we have been able to do here.
Yeah.
We are very hospitable.
yeah, I think so.
Yes, Damon, I would agree, but I would also like to say that the students who come to us are also hospitable. They're coming to OCMS, willing to be vulnerable, willing to share their context, their experiences, and the problems they have openly, open their heart out to us here, so that we can journey together, enriching one another as they do their research.
That's good. Yeah.
Let's go back to Zeb.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Appreciate the presentation. I say this to many people when they ask me about my experience here. The first time I sat with my house tutor, Dr. John, actually a mentor at that time, I always tell him it was very transformative for me because of the fact that he had the pen and paper and I was doing the talking. and it never switched. We finished the first meeting like that. And I thought, just to allude to what you were saying, the guest host dynamic, and I really found that worked for me. Just that principle, very different from my studies anywhere else before. So I appreciate that.
Let's go to Israel. Go ahead, unmute Israel.
Okay, thank you, Marina, for the very nice, good lecture. Many thoughts coming out from what you said, and hospitality is probably a terminology which could be understood in different ways, in different settings, in different cultures. And I was thinking about how important it is for certain forms of hospitality in gesticulating, as you mentioned about using the body, words, respect for our cultural differences. I think the issue of hospitality for me is a very huge, very universal. In a way, it covers so much, so many areas. Could be in the theological sense, also, I guess, could be in a very cultural, intercultural sense. And also, I was thinking between church people and people who are not in the church. How could this also could have a role in it? But I don't know, Marina, if you are familiar with the work of Paulo Freire, this Brazilian Latin American teacher, pedagogue, and educator, sorry. He brought up a theory of how do we look to the other as an object or as a subject. I'm trying to get the right translation from Spanish, but kind of when we teach, do we look at the other like someone who is supposed just to get what I came to give, or I am willing for the interaction, respecting the background, the experience and the knowledge which could be in the pupil, because he even talks about the pupil, not the student, but the pupil. And in our society, which is full of social categories in Latin America, that was a revolution for us, because in a way, the teacher was not so hierarchical, but it was more kind of a person who was willing to share and to receive. So Paulo Freire has worked a lot about that attitude, which was what you mentioned, was about this hospitality metaphor.
Yeah. Thank you. I would just like to pick on what you said about, hospitality can have a different meaning, and how you understand hospitality in different cultures would be different. So I had not, I'm sorry, I should have done that, because hospitality in some contexts can be misused. So it's a word also that can be misused, but that was not the scope of my paper, so I did not talk about it. I remember in one conference we were talking about hospitality, and it was really championed. Everyone was saying we should be hospitable. We should use this word all the time. This is a good term for all of us, and something that we should remember. Then there was this woman, a woman from the Philippines, who said, "Wait a minute, hospitality is a bad term for us. It's really not a good term, because." Because the guest comes from outside, and the women are being told to be hospitable. So what does this being hospitable means for the women who may have to sell their bodies, or whose bodies will be offered to the guests? So you have to really, so it's a word that can be problematized and critique, but that's not really where I want to go into. But I want to remind myself as well that I should have clarified, that I'm not using hospitality in any other sense rather than the biblical understanding of being hospitable. Okay, and then when you talk about how do we look at the others as the object or the subject, and also the category that our society has ascribed to us. Yes, I am aware that your color, the skin, your gender, the color of your skin, or even your the amount of money that you have, your educational background, that and based on that, society would ascribe and give you a place in the society. So in such a context, how would you practice this being hospitable when you have someone placed at the lower rank of the society, who you think is not really worth listening to, or who do not have much wisdom, who you assume do not have much wisdom? Again, here I would come back to what I have said earlier about being vulnerable, about the humility to listen to even those people and try to learn and be a guest to those people, even who you think or assume or society has ascribed to as not having much to offer. So I don't know, these are all ideals. David had said that these are all ideals and good things to promote, but how far can we achieve this? How can we achieve this, and how do we practice is something that I would invite you all to journey along with me. As I have said, I am just starting to develop this and do not really have all the answers as to how can we lift out this practice, this, what would I call, this aspect of hospitality, to be a guest, to be willing to be a guest, and to be willing to be a host at the same time. How can we lift this out in each of our contexts? Because contexts would differ. So you don't have one rule or one way of practicing it. So I think this is something all of us need to learn, experiment, and develop. So it's a way of developing together. So, and also knowledge is not fixed. The way we understand the gospel is not fixed. It constantly keeps changing with new ideas, new perspective, new stories, new experiences. So it's a journeying together. So therefore, this is my invitation to you all to journey together. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Marina. An excellent talk and lecture, and kicking off a whole series of lectures that will go forward. Marina, a quick summation of what we will be experiencing in the next few weeks of this session you've put together?
Yes. Okay. Next week we have Esther Mombo, who will be speaking on theological education and missional formation, looking at it from the perspective of women. She is, prioritizing the women's perspective, and I'm speaking it off my head. Okay, so, and on the 3rd of May, we have Terry, who will be looking at how do practitioners theologize and what is mission about all that? What is missional about all that? Then after that, we have Carlos Hum from Cuba, who will be looking at it from the Latin American perspective. And after that, we have Carla. She's talking about weaving together theologies and hospitality. Carla is from UBL, Costa Rica. And after that, we have Michael Bill from Germany. I think he's looking at theological education in a secularized context. And after that, the last one we have is Johan Knut from Pretoria. He will be looking at theological education and also looking at it from the perspective of Southern Africa. I'm not too sure about the title. I don't have it in front of me, so, but that's the gist of it.
Well, Marina, you've set a really good table, and it's going to be quite a feast that we enter into. Thank you so much for all the work you've done in this and for starting it off so well. And we look forward to the weeks again. And thank you all for attending, and look forward to seeing you next week. So with that, adieu.
Thank you.